basketball game tonight.
Who's playing tonight?
It's called to order the Electric Advisory Board meeting. It's Monday, April 7th, 2025, 5:30. Please join me for the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. Lord, give us wisdom and discernment. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first order is approval of the minutes for the regular meeting held March 17th, 2025.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay. Discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 All noes, same side. Okay. Motion cleared. Discussion, presentation?
So as promised, it's a repeat for two of you, new for new. So we thought we would do the famous Electric 101 stuff again, just so as we move into the budget process and everybody has a concept of the stuff we're talking about, because obviously the electric department's pretty complex here for the city. So I will try to breeze through this, because I know at least two of you have sat here. This will enable you all now to ridicule Mike and Amanda for not being here, because you got 1/3 of the new folks on there. So I won't belabor it, and I'll get right to it. And I'll try to be brief. This is the only thing that was on the agenda tonight. Next month we'll start delving into the budget process and that kind of stuff. So with that, first in the United States, there's 3 organizations that provide electric power to businesses and our residences. And those are investor-owned utilities, municipal-owned utilities, and cooperative utilities. So wherever you are in the United States, you're going to be buying power from one of those 3 entities. Investor-owned utilities probably make up about 70%, at least in Florida, and probably pretty close to that nationwide, of all the power sold in the United States. Investor-owned utilities are for-profit organizations where profits go to shareholders. So their models are a little bit different than ours. So they're purely in the business to make money. I don't know if they'll say that's their number one goal, but when you're a capitalist and you're in business, you want to make money. So I say that without any judgment. Their goal is to make money. Of course, they want to provide a good product. They want to work safe. All those cool stuff. They want to be competitive. So we all have that in common, but there is a big disparity, I think, in the way we approach the businesses between purely a profit-driven business versus a pure business like us. I laugh. Municipal utilities and cooperative utilities were similar creatures, but slightly different. We're actually kind of both municipal utilities and cooperative utilities kind of born out of the same want during the 1920s and electrification of the United States, where investor-owned utilities wouldn't provide utilities in the urban areas because there wasn't a profit motive, because it was hard to extend wire and infrastructure and generate for a smaller group of businesses and households. So major areas in the United States didn't get developed. And who did develop those areas? Municipals or co-ops. So our difference is we're not motive, we're not profit driven. We provide the same product as an investor-owned utility, and we're probably splitting the rest of the customer base in half. 15% is typically about a co-op and about 15% a municipal. And our differences, municipal-owned utilities are either typically run by a city commission or an authority. There's certain co-ops or certain munis in the state of Florida that you'll hear that the bigger municipal utilities like JEA, Jacksonville Electric Authority, OUC, Orlando Utility Commission, KUA even, Kissimmee Utility Authority, where those are authority-driven organizations. So the city commissions or the governing body in those entities have typically appointed a board like yourselves. But the difference in that is the city has ultimately given the keys, if you will, to the authority to manage the system in terms of rate making, policy making, capital improvement projects, all those type of things. And at the end of the day, what the city garners back, and the biggest difference between investor-owned and municipal utilities is the dividend. So in an investor-owned or IOU, those dividends go to shareholders. In a municipal electric utility, those dividends typically come back to the cities in the form of what we call a transfer or a pilot, payment in lieu of taxes. If you look at the charter of OUC, for example, they have a specific pilot. So it's rated on a specific amount of payment in lieu of taxes. We are a transfer-based organization, so in our charter, we've limited our transfer to 6%. So 6% of electric revenues are transferred into the general fund for the use of the public. That comes back in providing the general services of the city. So general service of the city, police and fire are the lion's share of pretty much any municipal corporation or county for that matter. It's probably the number one thing that we do. So those transfers, I mean, it's fair to say, help fund police and fire. They also go to different capital improvement projects and those type of things. So then we jump down to co-ops. They pretty much look like us with two different variations. They don't have a dividend or transfer. Those monies or surpluses that they have is typically kept what they call amongst the members. And then they share those highs or lows with additions or deletion credits or debits on your utility account. Here, close to home, you guys know SECO. Everybody's heard of SECO, Sumter Electric Co-op. That's probably the biggest co-op in the state. And they're a distribution co-op, so we'll get into that here in a second. But they call those hot bucks. So if you got friends or neighbors who are on SECO, they have hot bucks, and so they give you a credit, and that's kind of their dividend that they share. And all co-ops share that in the United States. The next biggest derivative of a co-op is they have an elected board or a body that the members hire. So if you're on SECO or Clay or name the co-op you want to inject, they elect their board members like we elect our city commissioners. That's really pretty much the rudimentary difference between the three. Investor-owned, and you'll hear us refer to those often, IOUs, co-ops, and cities. Any questions there? So now we get into I'm going to diverge from the three makeups of what organization provides you electric power into how do we get our power and how are things broke down and what specifically do we do here in Leesburg. So the first one is generation. The first way you get your electricity is you have to have a generation source. Generation comes in all forms of different models. Typically, generation is, unless you get into kind of green energies, but everything kind of that is a fuel-based energy product, gas, oil, diesel, nuclear, coal. Those are all kind of, I would say, fuel-based generation. So we make heat, we mix it with water, that makes steam, it turns the turbine. And the turbine is big copper reel spinning together that makes electricity. So by and large, that's 80 to 85% of all your energy, no matter who sells it to you, no matter what they're saying about how they love solar or green energy, we're all fuel dependent. And then there's arguments on what fuel is better. Here in Florida, probably about 75 to 70% of all your electricity, whether it's from FPL, an IOU, SECO, a co-op, or the city of Leesburg, comes from natural gas. So Florida is probably one of the biggest states in the union where natural gas is our primary source of energy. And probably up until recently, a lot of the transfers from nuclear and coal shifted over to natural gas. And then probably just, I'm being super high level here, probably the Biden administration in 2020 to 2024, probably that was the biggest administration who started trying to shift away from natural gas and go to green sources. So green sources we'll put up here as hydroelectric. Hydroelectric is obviously you build a dam, the water comes down, the water spins the turbines. Windmill, instead of those type of things, the wind spins the fan and the fan spins the turbines. Then we get into kind of different stuff. Solar's obviously a little bit different. That has solar energy, makes electricity on its own. Wind, biofuels, all sorts of other stuff, and those are kind of seen as green and renewables. So for this purpose, I'm just going to kind of put a big dividing line between fuel-based and green-based. And while every utility, investor-owned, co-op, or city alike, we talk a lot about fuel mix and diversification, which is important. We put a lot of stress or emphasis on green energy. If we're being direct and candid, nobody in the industry, in the electric industry, likes green stuff. And the reason is, we say we do, and we make you think we do, but really at the end of the day, green is inefficient. And so green doesn't return value as much as fuel. It's cumbersome to make, and it doesn't really provide the source of energy that we need. Because, I don't know what our total national load is. It's in the gigawatts times whatever. I'm not even throwing a number at you. But the amount of electricity that we need for our consumption nationwide is humongous. And those green sources just haven't put in, there's not the value there to shift. So while we talk about, you'll hear different utilities shifting. I'll beat up on GRU a little bit. OUC talks about it. We all talk about going green and going solar by 2050. I really think that's more of a talking point than an actual reality. And the utilities that have tried to go green, you have seen their prices go up versus folks who are still fuel dependent. And classic example, I'll talk about this a little bit more later, with our wholesale supplier, the Florida Municipal Power Agency, FMPA. We've even canceled our last solar project. So we'll get into that here in a little bit. But those are the types of generation. And that's the root of everything that we do, is we've got to make energy first. So this next chart kind of shows you the 4 sections of how power gets to our customers. So the first one is generation. So over at whatever plant you drive by or whatever source you see, the generation plant spin the turbines or green makes whatever, and you have energy. That energy then is distributed into transmission lines, which is like the highway. So that's the I-4 or the I-95 of the electric business. Is we got to send high transmission, high voltage power out to different locations, but that energy is at such a voltage that you can't consume it at your house and blow stuff up. So we've got to downgrade it so that then we go into what we call a distribution system. So we go from the generation plant to the grid. You'll hear it referred to as transmission, high voltage. And then we downgrade it at a substation to a distribution voltage. And then the same with transmission to distribution. That voltage is still too high for customers to use. So if you plug into a distribution voltage, you're going to burn up your hair dryer, you're going to burn up your TV. So what we need is even a lower voltage. And you kind of see where it comes out. You see at the generation plants, we come out at 12 kV, so that's 12,000 kilovolts. To transmission, which is typically 400 kilovolts to 69 kilovolt, and 69 is the low end of transmission. And then on the distribution side, we're at 13,000 or 2,400. I jumped here. So we go from distribution, then we hit another transformer, and then we go to your house where you have the lower 240 volt. That then now you're using that at your house. So what you typically probably hear in storms or the bang in the night is typically a transformer that blows up. So that's this transformer right here. And it going from a distribution voltage to your house voltage. And then it's in your house. Here in Leesburg, we are in what we call the I'm gonna use this chart and then go to the other chart. We buy all of our power from the Florida Municipal Power Agency. FMPA is a joint action agency that was formed back in the early 70s, maybe 68. If you ever have to guess about when something was formed in Florida, guess 1968, because that's when the Constitution of the state really changed from the early time to nowadays, and we still refer to that. That date is pretty significant. So statutes and everything, the basis of all that is legal in those big giant law books, 1968 is the magic date. So in 1968, all this stuff was kind of set up as far as the parameters of how we govern electric distribution and transmission, all that stuff. So FMPA was formed shortly after that. I don't think it was a coincidence. But long story short, FMPA is our joint action agency. There's 48 municipal electric utilities, about 48 the right number? There's a 43. I think it's 48. Throughout the state, and FMPA represents some of them. We have two joint action agencies, if you would. One is FMPA, Florida Municipal Power Agency. The other is FMEA, Florida Municipal Electric Agency. They're kind of brothers and sisters, but they do two totally different things. So you'll hear talk, we'll mention FMPA and FMEA, and those acronyms just roll off our tongue. So let me tell you the difference. FMPA is power supplier. So all things that associate with generation and transmission, are FMPA. All things that are legal or advocacy or lobbying are FMEA, Florida Municipal Electric Association. So when the state legislature picks on us, we typically pick up the phone and call FMEA. That's led by Amy Zubli, who's the general manager of FMEA, who's based in Tallahassee. And then when you want to pick up your phone and complain about your electric rates, then you call FMPA and you talk to Jacob Williams, the general manager of FMPA. FMPA is very active with FMEA, so we kind of, I don't want to say it's redundant, but our interests as an individual city with legislation or with things that happen that govern the chart also affect FMPA. So specifically, FMPA was organized to provide what we call projects. And projects are the generation source of this chart. So FMPA has a number of projects. I think their number is 8. And they kind of call them by title. St. Lucie 1, St. Lucie 2, that was a specific project where there was a need for energy from cities. FMPA organized, hey, let's build a power plant. And St. Lucie was born, or Stanton projects. The flagship project of FMPA is called the All Requirements Project. So that gets back to this chart a little bit, and that is what we are a member of. So All Requirements says, and we refer to it as the FMPA ARP. So all the acronyms are going to get thrown at you. So the ARP is now a division of FMPA. The ARP likes to think, and it pretty much is, the flagship of FMPA because it incorporates 13 other members, about a quarter of their members, and it provides all their requirements. So when we talk about the generation and transmission portion of providing electricity, there's several requirements that you need. You need generation, you need spinning reserves, you do all sorts of stuff on the generation side that's bundled into your bill at the end of the day. So bundled bill at the end of the day is, our bill is, right now we're 132, I think. Yes, 132.94 is about, and so that's so we measure every 1,000 kilowatts. The first 1,000 is typically the ruler for every utility. And what do you sell the first 1,000 kilowatts of residential electricity for? Our number is 132.94. That's a bundle bill. So when you get that bill, your generation cost is in there, your transmission cost is in there, your service cost is in there. All those things are all wrapped up in that bill. So there's a bunch of different requirements in that bill. The city is a member of the ARP, and what we have to do to get to the distribution and utilization part of this chart is we have to buy all these requirements. We have to buy our transmission, we have to buy our generation, and we look to FMPA to do that for us. And the city of Leesburg has done that since the early 80s. So we have been a member of the All Requirements Project for since its inception. And so when we say FMPA, ARP, that's our generation, that's our transmission, those are all those requirements. That is the sole, and the budget book you see around the city, right, is about this big. The budget book you see around the city, right, is about this big, and it's about $200 million. And there's one line in it, that's our wholesale line, that's our bill from the FMPA ARP, and it's about, I think we're running about 55 million right now. So a quarter of that book, that's this big, one line, one page, one number, is 25% of the whole book, and that is all requirements associated with generation and transmission. So, in Leesburg, we use FMPA to buy and transmit energy, and then here in Leesburg, now we break down from the transmission side to the distribution side. So, you'll see the big giant US 27 is a great example. If you go down US 27, you'll see the big giant poles. Those are the Duke transmission lines that feed the city of Leesburg. So energy comes off of that transmission line, the big giant ones, and it goes into our substations. We have 5 in the city of Leesburg. We call one the North Substation. Mark, that one's up by you, Lewis Road. We have the Center Substation, which is across the street from the Baptist Church on US 27, off Center Street, hence the name, Center Sub. We have the East Sub, which is, that one, I don't know why we call it East Sub, but that one's the one that's right here. I guess we would call it East Sub because it was before we put the one out at the airport. But that's the East Sub is right here, the one here that used to be by Catrali. You probably saw on Facebook when it caught on fire about a year ago. That was East Sub. We have the next substation, the Airport Sub, which is actually out on 44 by Treasure Trove and kind of all that area. We've got 4 subs. Who am I missing? And Pixiola. I'm missing Pixiola Sub, which is right there behind the CVS. So those are our 5. We have one on the books where we purchased some property next to Pembroke Pines for the 6th substation, but that one's still in the works because load issues and those type of stuff just hasn't risen high enough yet, although we're getting there, so it's in the works. To build a substation, rough number, I'll throw $5 million at you. And typically there's 2 transformers in substations, so we come off what they call the high side, the transmission side, into the transformers, and then that downgrades it to our 13,000 volts. That goes into our distribution system. The distribution system, I don't know how many circuits we have. 25 different circuits. I should have brought the circuit map for you. But we have each, and the math is about right, about 5 circuits-ish per sub that break out and serve everybody. Then we go, so after we go distribution voltage, then we hit the transformers. And again, you'll see that either the pole mount transformers, so you'll see that transformer on a pole, or if we have an underground circuit, you'll see a pad mount or a big green or a black box sitting on the ground. There's transformers that get it to your voltage, and then we go from there to your house. So in electric speed, after we go from the substation to distribution lines, we call that, primary the primary system or distribution voltage, synonyms. So you'll hear the electric guys, they typically call it feeders or primaries. And then when we hit the next transformer that goes into your house, then we have the secondary voltage. So that's typically a wire that goes from a transformer to your house or underground up through a conduit and into your weatherhead. So your weatherhead can be that one on the roof, looks like a woodpecker with wires going into it, or underground, and then it comes up your house by your garage. They're typically where it's fed from, and there's a picture, this is what underground service comes from the breaker to underground primary to a pad mount transformer, and then you have an underground service wire, or if it's overhead, it comes off a pole mount transformer into your house.
So is all new construction going to be underground?
Typically, yes. So while you bring up that number, let me throw these numbers at you. I jumped ahead. So to run all that side of us, we have about 49 employees in the electric department. As just for comparison, the city of Leesburg has about 525 employees. So 50 of them are electric. We have 27,854 customers, and we serve kind of, I guess four distinct areas. We serve customers that are inside this, and your composition of the board tries to encapsulate this. We have about 13,000 city customers. We have about 9,500 unincorporated Lake County customers. We have about 4,500 Park customers. And then the Sumter County is, I won't belabor this point, but there's about 1,000 of those. Those are the villages, that's the villages of Catherine. So on this note, it's probably a good place to say, all of this state of Florida is regulated as far as who serves what where. And if you change a territory, and typically it's done in virgin areas where there's no service. So while all the state has territorial maps that are approved by the Florida Public Service Commission, everybody knows where they're gonna serve. There's actually there's a few spots where it's in somebody's territory, but there's not service to it. So on occasion, we find that our territories aren't quite efficient, meaning one provider could probably provide it better. And so you'll see better meaning there's not redundancy, less system to build, easier to provide access to one utility or another. So on occasion, you'll see utilities capitulate and say, okay, we should trade territories because it makes sense. And so when we took on those 935 customers in the villages, the village was actually the impetus of that change because they wanted the villages to be set up in more cohesive blocks so that their individual residents would have the same supplier versus on this side of the street is utility A, that side of the street is utility B. So they actually approached us and Duke to say, you guys need to flip-flop. So we did the territorial trade, and so the villages of West Lake, which used to be our electric territory, was traded to the villages. I think we did that in about 2017, and so we flip-flopped. We took a section of Duke territory in Sumter County, and they took our territory. Because in this case, I don't know if it was so much, maybe there was a little bit of economics for the utilities. It's probably a little bit easier for us to reach the villages of Catherine, because actually our service in that area comes from the north, and we were immediately there, and Duke came from the south, so it was maybe a little bit easier utility-wise to service it, but the real push there was the villages. So that's our breakdown. I think the thing that I would point out that's interesting there is that about 60% of our customers are outside the city limits. As we've pushed on in time, and as different utilities have functioned differently and attention has been paid by the state legislature to these type of issues, outside inside customer has become a real talking point amongst our state legislators, and representation of rate making gets a lot of talk these days. I still will continually argue that I think even though we have 60% of our customers outside city limits and they don't have a direct voice, meaning an elected official who represents them, who you vote this person on, a body, or they appoint somebody to directly make your rates, our unincorporated residents through this body and through just the natural, I think, local politics still has a significant amount of influence in rate making, even though it's not directly elected, versus the model that investor-owned utilities will say, which is the Public Service Commission is the model. And why I think even though you don't have direct representation is different than the Public Service Commission is, the Public Service Commission is appointed by the governor, and there's 5 members that represent 7, 8, 9 million electric customers, where here we have 5 elected officials. Chances are you know the elected officials. Chances are you have their phone number in your cell phone, and if you have an issue, you're going to be calling them. You have direct access to the CEO of the utility. You have pretty much direct access to the electric director. So even though on paper they're not elected, you have significant influence. And I think you probably see that a lot, maybe not so much in rate making, but when storms times come, your circuits are down, I think our customers are getting a lot more information, have a lot more influence than the IOU PSC way. Did everybody, I know I said that in acronym speak, but did that make sense? I don't think that's accepted for a couple of reasons. The investor-owned utilities are very lobbyist-centric. They have a lot of political capital, and they use that political capital. I say that without judgment. And it's a complex topic. So when you have state legislators who go to Tallahassee to do all sorts of stuff, I wouldn't say there's too many of them that are versed in the electric industry. So then that puts a crutch on that legislator to listen to lobbyists or listen to the influence on where the checks are coming from. Again, I said that without judgment as well. And that's what's different about our system. Because when you yell at your city commissioner, whether you're inside or outside the city limits, you're meeting them at Walmart, you're meeting them at Publix, you're seeing them at ball games, and that has a lot more influence, I think, to 27,000 on 5 versus 9 million on 5. So I think our system, it has a lot more representation in it. So with that, we'll break down our O&M budget. Operation and maintenance budget's about 7.9 million. Our capital budget's about 3.2, and our bulk energy. So there's a bulk energy purchase from FMPA, and Brad put in there adjusted for gas. That's 66 million. I think that number's a tick high. But then I think you asked too, what our percentage of over versus underhead. That's how we got on this whole train. So now to answer your question, about 33% of our system is overhead, and about 67% is underground. So I'm gonna say that's a pretty high number, overhead, underground, meaning we have per capita probably a lot more underground utilities than overhead. So when new systems go in, especially on the residential subdivision side, yeah, they're going in underground. Our system expansion, when we're talking feeders or distribution lines, still overhead a little bit. We do take time when it makes sense to go underground with stuff. And then there's a lot of schools of thought too on what's better, overhead, underground. So real brief synopsis on that while we're at this stage is, if you ask any line person, journeyman or journey person, what they rather work on, overhead, underground, their answer is going to be overhead. And statistics, as much as we keep, will show you that overhead and underground outages are about the same, maybe a little bit of an edge to underground, doesn't go out as quick as overhead, but the restoration time is the big difference. So when folks can get out there and see that a wire's down, or see that a pole is broken, or see that a fuse is blown, the restoration time is a lot quicker. Versus underground, we have to do a lot more troubleshooting. So what lags behind is, while maybe you get a little bit more reliability from underground, you don't get the fix as fast. And then when you put that all into dollars and cents, overhead, it still really has its place. I'll also state too that if you have good tree trimming policies, and you keep Mother Nature away from your overhead lines. Even here in Central Florida, I mean, we don't typically see the Cat 4, Type 5 type crazy windstorms. We see big storms, 100+ mile an hour winds, generally the Cat 1 type of variety. Your overhead systems can sustain that if you've got your trees cut back and you don't have stuff falling into your lines. So when you put everything together, probably we like underground better, because I'm going to tell you that what it provides you is the aesthetics. You don't see it all around, out of sight, out of mind. So it looks cool, but I would still argue that overhead is more functional, costs less. Although the numbers these days are getting pretty nip and tuck on overhead underground. I skipped a couple of things here. But we kind of touched on it in that. So, questions?
Quick question. Go back to your last slide with the number of homes.
Oh, going the wrong direction there, Mark. That one.
How do you see the number of customers changing, let's say the next year, the next 3 years, next 5 years, based on what is on the books, or dirt that's been committed but construction hasn't begun yet? Where does 27.8, what does that look like in a few years?
I see our unincorporated non-city customer base growing. There's your answer. So this is our electric territory. So let's jump to that on Mark's question. So this is the box of our electric territory. You kind of see the green is Leesburg proper. I don't know whatever color that is, brown, Fruitland Park, but everything in the red box that's the 27,800 customers. That's the little Sumter piece, the villages of Catherine. And this was the territorial flip-flop. We used to this line straight across and up, and then so we gave this, so this is Duke underneath. So all the growth talk you hear, right? Leesburg's busting at the seams. We've got all this crazy growth going on. For our electric system, from my perspective, I think you see it up in the Fruitland Park sector the most, where we've grown. Fruitland Park. The other area of growth that we have in here, where we're just kind of starting to see it, these little green boxes, Treasure Trove, Silver Lake Point, Silver Lake Estate, Silver Lake Point. So that's the old golf course. That was the Romac Ostrander. I think that one, I can't remember what this one is. Chris, what's that one?
That's the one at Jackson Road and Radio Road.
I can't remember the name of that. So I think the growth, I'm gonna call that the northwest corner, is happening, but it hasn't, I don't think, been as fast as the growth in Fruitland Park. So now when you hear like most of the chatter about Leesburg growth, it's happening in South Leesburg. So we hear the talk about, and not even on the map for our electric territory. So this red line is roughly where 33 and 27 split. So when you get to that point, you are outside the city's electric territory, and you are now in Duke land. And Duke has kind of bands. So Duke has this band, but then as soon as you kind of get down to Arlington Ridge Legacy, the band of Seco comes in. So all the growth you hear about Whispering Hills, Bar Key, Blue Cedar, Hodges, Anthony, that's probably, I would say, the lion's share of where we're seeing a lot where Leesburg will grow the fastest, but it's not in our territory. So crystal ball 2035 or 2040, what do I see? Leesburg at 35, 40,000 people are electric, and if you got a city of 35 or 40,000, split it in half-ish, and that's what you have for electric customers. So maybe we peak out at 30, 35,000 electric customers. I think that's a big number. I don't think we get that, but we'll have even more growth in the south. So then, mind you, this isn't the city limit map, because there's a big chunk of the city limits down here. I think the interesting thing for us, which is a dynamic, and another reason we did a couple of things, the redistricting, and as well as the charter amendments to have the supermajority vote to sell an enterprise fund. So an enterprise fund is our utility funds, water, sewer, electric, gas. If we would ever contemplate selling those, we want a supermajority vote, because I think with our 5 districts, we could in the future have 2 or 3 city commissioners who are not on our electric system, who are involved with rate-making policy. So that's an interesting dynamic. So right now, we've got 5 city commissioners, 4 are on the system, 1 is not. So as that growth dynamic changes, I think we'll probably be a pretty unique municipal utility in that there could be 2 or 3 commissioners who are from South Leesburg in SECO territory versus Leesburg territory. So that's the dynamic that we need to watch for. I think it'll make the city manager job harder and the electric director job harder, because you'll have folks who might be calling shots on rate making that aren't on the system. So that's why I think as this body, as we grow into this role of having the electric advisory board, maybe there comes a time where Leesburg Electric operates more as an authority fashion. I think that's what the future holds. We skipped a couple things there. Let me kind of go back, and I think I hit I'm not going to hit every slide in here, but just so we put some name. I went backward. Just to hit some names and faces, because we laid out the generation, the transmission, the distribution. So let me just kind of hit, and we talked about service areas. So let me kind of just hit some of the ways that we break down. So our operations center, Chris, I thought that was you.
Tony's over it.
Tony, so you're under the, so our operations center is up there on Griffin Road. We talk about, that monitors every stuff. So we have the smart meters. Typically, we'll know when your power goes off before you do, and hopefully before people start calling us, we already have crews dispatched. I think we're pretty good at that. And that's all done at the operations center. Chris is over that as well. So Tony reports to Chris. Chris Atkins is, what's your official title? Deputy
Director for
Operations? No.
Operations and Technical Services.
So Greg has kind of the house split in, Brad has the house split in operations. There's their purpose. The next one is metering. So Arnold Eugene is our meter tech, or the supervisor over there. So operations talks about keeping monitoring everything. Metering talks about measuring all the consumption. So metering, I think there's only 2 or 3 guys in that department, but that's obviously super critical, because that measures the flow and consumption. So that's a big part of what we do. Service planning is under Steve Davis. So that goes back to kind of both your all's questions about underground overhead. So Steve is our system planner. So every time we got to add on to the system or hook in a major new service, whatever, that's Steve making sure the lines are coming up with a design on what kind of voltages we need, what kind of voltage you need if you're a big customer. So Steve reviews all that. Then the next phase is, I would have done this in a different order. So I'm jumping all around. Substation maintenance. So that gets back to when we go from transmission voltage to distribution voltage, that we've got a group of folks that manage and maintain all the substations. And then we get into, I'm gonna jump to this one, distribution and construction, which is Greg David. So that's probably like when you think of a lineman, the guys out on the pole hooking stuff up after the storms. That's Greg's department of making sure the power's flowing and the poles are up versus Steve designing systems. And then we've got, I think, the contract administration. So we do a lot of stuff with, let me get back, where was that? Contract administration is a kind of a smaller part of the house, but we've got a few contracts on tree trimming, underground utilities. So when we are putting in underground, we'll go to a company who will put in conduit, and then Greg so typically come back in and feed it. So contracting and tree trimming, or undergrounding it, conduit and tree trimming are our big contract expenses, and then we have administration. And that's really the presentation. Clear as mud? Did I go through too fast? But I think the big takeaway is, as we move forward in the year, the types of provider, investor-owned, municipals and co-ops, and their differences, the territorial issues that we're all regulated in a certain area to serve, the relationship of who's making rates and how that affects us, and then the divisions of the service: generation, transmission, distribution. And those are the big pieces. I think hopefully when you have that in your head, as we go through and talk about rate structure and those type of things, you've got that basic background.
Very good.
And that's our presentation, barring any other questions.
Thank you.
Real quickly, sorry. Not a political conversation, but will tariffs influence the generation of power? I mean, I assume it'll probably have an effect potentially on equipment, things like that. But as far as the generation of power, might tariffs have any impact on that? That might trickle down to the homeowner at some point.
Okay, the broad answer, you got to say yes, because the steel and the copper and the wires and all the things that go into making power plants are going to be affected by tariffs. I think the thing that probably puts that in question is probably some of the executive orders that the Trump administration has passed kind of right out of the box, going back more towards fossil fuel type of energy versus green energy. But even on the green energy side, there were different costs. Like, for example, there's really not a solar panel made in the United States. And I don't think most people know that. And the other thing I think most people don't know is producing that wafer, that solar wafer, is really a dirty industry. And we don't see it that much in the U.S. because they're not made here. So I think tariffs will have an effect. I think on that note too, there's a lot more talk about going back more to nuclear type of energies in the future. And you kind of see 30-year blocks, maybe 40-year blocks on how we've gone. Like in the 70s, we loved nuclear until Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, right? And then everybody wanted to go away from that. And then kind of that coal and nuclear kind of thing. And people didn't like coal because coal was dirty and nuclear was radioactive. And that really ushered in by 2000 kind of the shifting of those fuels to the gas fuels. And so everybody in the early 2000s really went gas heavy, and you saw the kind of what I call the first blip in about around 2005, when natural gas typically hung out around $2 a decatherm to buy. And then when everybody was going gas in the early 2000s, you saw that first spike go up to $15 a decatherm. Everybody thought the world was going to blow up, but then the price leveled out, and then the world kind of stayed the same. And then kind of the Obama and Biden administration kind of started saying gas was bad. And maybe not so much from a CO standpoint, but from a heat index. So even though natural gas didn't have the NOx that maybe coal fire did. It still puts off heat in the atmosphere, and that's a greenhouse gas. So now we start seeing some of that. I think we're going to start seeing some of that roll back and forth. So all this time, at least since I've been in the business, which say 97, what we see is kind of each presidency change broad perspectives. We start going one way, and then every 4 or 8 years, that direction changes. So, we had one, Bush kind of started holding on to some of the older coal fire plants. I think Big Bend, Tico's plant is an example of that kind of plant started. I think Clinton was starting to phase out and go to gas. Bush got elected. We held on to Big Bend a little bit longer. But then by the time Obama came in, you started seeing more shift go to gas, really until Biden, I think, when then gas was deemed as bad. But you had the interruption of Trump in there, right, between Biden and Obama, and he kind of went back to fossil fuels, and now you see it starting over again. So really, I think where the industry suffered is we've had stop, go, stop, go, stop, go, whichever side of the equation you're on, and that's been bad for planning. But I think probably in the last 4 years or so, I think you see nuclear starting to come back. Nuclear fission, about 2 years ago was probably that first big test where they kind of figured out, we can make nuclear fission work. When do we see that in bulk? Probably not for another 20 years. So really, I kind of think what's going to bridge the gap between now and then, I guess it's probably we go back to gas. We'll flirt with the green stuff. But I think, me personally, I don't think the green stuff is really practical, because as we see it go into implementation, I can't remember what the number is. An acre of ground, of an acre of solar panels, what get you 5 megawatts? If that, our system is, when we peak out at, I think our new peak is like 125. So I mean, do the math on that, and then put that in the United. I mean, there's not enough ground. And then the other part we talk about solar is, we're the Sunshine State, and we only get solar energy in Florida 20% of the time. And when we need it the most, it's not producing. So that's why these things are problems. And so I've been surprised at how the Biden administration was so connected to that, because I think there's a lot of minds around that. And I'm not advocating we pollute the earth, but I'm advocating, I don't think we've done our homework on finding the right energy source for the future and sticking with it. So. Kind of shadows of to come of, our budget process again is coming up. So we'll talk ad nauseum, we'll break down the budget, and we'll talk about rate making. I'll save power cost adjustment and that kind of stuff. I think we talked about it a little bit last time, so we'll talk about that a little more. Obviously, the power cost adjustment went up this month, but you also see some press releases coming out where FPL is going up. Duke is that the last one I saw? Was Duke go up? Seco just announced a 12% increase. I don't say that with glee, but I do say it as more of a "I told you so." As don't yell at us. It's not us here at City Hall messing with your rates. It's really the industry. And so where the industry has really seen effects is on this back and forth of fuel sources. What is it going to be in the future? And then 2000s really saw inflation really hit the industry. So, back in 2019, a transformer cost $1,500. Now a transformer costs $3,500. So almost everything has doubled. Our utility, not including the power cost adjustment, has not increased our base rate. So I do see, unfortunately, I see a base rate coming. The electric department has shown some signs of life with trying to squirrel away a little bit of cash. So we'll talk about those kind of things and balance how much cash we want to have versus where we want our rate to be. And then we'll talk about trade-offs too. We did that a lot last year with One of the big things we talk about is, hey, can we have a big bells and whistles system where we have this immediate notification system? We talked a lot about that, but those systems are really expensive and IT laden, and increase our costs. And one of the feedbacks that we got from Duke was, they have a great system as far as notifications, but really when you break down into it, they set that bar so high. The complaints that I've received from Duke have been, oh yeah, we got notified in a minute that our power was going to be out, but they told us it was going to be out for 3 days. High expense and kind of, so they've got that expensive system, but then they set the bar so unreasonable that it doesn't help you. So, and honestly, understandably so, because sometimes it's difficult to troubleshoot stuff. I think that's another area where we do a little bit better in the job because we have a smaller system, more people per lane mile. We can give you better estimates, and I think we do better in storms. But all those other bells and whistles. So at the end of the day, we really start cutting down on automated type of informational dissemination because we've been doing it the old-fashioned way here. But that saves you when you go pay your bill. So I'm sure we will have all those discussions more. I think ultimately my hope is by the time we roll to October 1, we'll ultimately see, hopefully, a rollback of the power adjustment and an increase in the base rate. Another reason for 2.5 versus 2.25, so that maybe those things offset. So, and what the difference there is if that fuel cost money is going directly into the pot for fuel only, and where we see the utility struggling, or I don't want to use the word struggle, but where we see could use some improvement is to have a little bit more cash on hand. And so it's kind of that balance, and we'll talk about that a lot this summer. But all those principles are all the things, the basics of all the intricate details we'll talk about.
Very good. Roll call. Bethany, you have anything?
No, I do not.
Yes, sir.
All right. Meeting stands adjourned.
So we'll see you all next month.
First Monday.